Howdy, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the different Mythic Plus dungeons that we're going to be seeing in the Season 1 Mythic Plus pool. So we're going to talk about kind of how we feel about each of them and kind of rank them against each other. So this is obviously a very subjective topic, but we're going to be rating the dungeons based on things like how much freedom you have in routing, how the boss and trash mechanics feel, how the movement through the dungeon is, how long the dungeons are, and ultimately kind of give them a rank of how happy we'd be if we end up with that key. An S tier dungeon is one that we're really excited to see, while a C or D tier key is one we're probably going to re-roll any chance we get. We've had quite a bit of chance at this point to play these on the beta in Mythic Plus, so we have a pretty good idea of how the dungeons feel at this point.
Keep in mind, one factor is this does not involve the loot table. So yeah, you get the key because there's a piece of loot that you want specifically in that dungeon. This has nothing to do with the loot tables at all. This is just based on if we like them, how maybe difficult the dungeons are, if you need a coordinated group to do them at a higher level, or if they're pretty puggable, how friendly they are to the player, basically.
Mm-hmm. So the first dungeon we're going to talk about then is Ruby Life Pools. And Ruby Life Pools lands pretty solidly in A for us. This was the first dungeon we were testing. It's gone through a lot of iterations at this point, but we're pretty happy with where it is overall.
Yeah, this is a fun one. It's a pretty short dungeon. It's got some mini bosses in it, which are a good time. I always like mini bosses in the dungeons. Gives it a little bit of flavor when it's fortified. Makes those mini bosses and that trash just a little bit harder than just being your same plain Jane packs that just have a little bit more health and do more damage.
So this is one of the two 30-minute timers. There's this and Court of Stars are both 30 minutes, and those are the two shortest dungeons, which generally speaking, we're a little happier to see short dungeons. This one, though, it's not quite up into an S tier for us. The pathing on this is going to be very, very linear. You're not going to have a whole lot of differences week to week on how you're pulling this trash. You may, on some weeks, be able to get off with slightly bigger pulls, but it's not going to be the one where you can just pull huge and do a ton of AoE. There are still going to be some AoE stops and things that are important that just are going to be pretty difficult to do especially in pug keys if you're pulling too big.
Yeah, there's not too much skippable trash as well. Like, you're going to get some of your count at the beginning, and you could pull a little bit extra there if you wanted to. But then there's not really a good spot where you can do a skip later. In order to activate the second boss, you have to kill all the trash up there anyway. So there's no skips available there. Very, very linear.
Yeah, and on Tyrannical, like we were talking about, these bosses are going to get a little bit sketchy.
Yeah, I'm personally not a big fan of the last boss itself. There's a lot of area denial, and the dragon's kind of randomly breathing fire all over the group, or at least trying to. And then once the boss actually mounts up on the dragon, you can't melee him, or at least not without getting right up on the dragon. And even then with the fire, there's a lot of difficulty with kind of that last boss. Plus, if the healer doesn't dispel, the tank just falls over.
Yeah, and as tanks, we hate having to rely on healers for anything, so... All right, so Ruby Life Pools lands in A. Azure Vaults, which was the next Dragonflight dungeon we tested, kind of goes the opposite direction. This one kind of lands bottom of the barrel for us in C tier.
This one's hot garbage. We actually just ran it just to make sure that it was actually hot garbage.
Yeah, we didn't trust just how bad we thought it was until we ran it again, and we're like, yeah, no, this one still kind of sucks.
Yeah, the trash is awful. It's got little whelps that are floating around with a circle around them, and if you activate them, it activates trash that just wipes you. The thing is you can completely skip these and avoid them. So it's almost like a nuisance alarm sort of thing that one guy in your pug is going to run off and activate one of these dragons. And now you can stun it and kill it, and it has pretty low HP, but it's kind of a waste of time, and it's better to just skip them at this point. And I think things like that in dungeons are, why is it there other than just to kind of, hey, don't go here, is all they're really saying with that trash. It's not enjoyable, at least for that part.
Yeah, and then the boss design for several of these bosses, it's just not very exciting. Like the first boss, you added a couple adds here and there. You have to blow up different spikes with your debuff, but it's not exciting. The second boss, same kind of thing. Like, I felt like I could probably pull the entire second boss room onto the boss and be okay with organized group. It's not... The boss doesn't really do any mechanics that are hard besides shoot some orbs out that are really telegraphed. Same thing, the third boss does some area denial, and you have to stand in a ward occasionally, which we thought was going to... Ooh, that's going to be a hard enrage, because the the wards go away, but they just reset if the fight keeps going. So even that one, maybe interesting mechanic. We're like, oh, we can just keep going forever. This is dumb. Right, and then the final boss is kind of just obnoxious. The end result is that you basically have to move at least once every 8 seconds, and then you're going to be getting slowed by like 50%. And that's not a huge deal. It's like the slow itself isn't necessarily the end of the world, except that there's like you got to get to different spikes, but also dealing with thundering while also dodging some of the orbs and slowed is just not fun. There's nothing about it where you're like, woo, we're going slow.
At 10 stacks, it's a 70% slow, and I was on a Havoc Demon Hunter, so not so bad for me, but for slow classes for that wheelchair is going 70% slower. It's rough to get around.
Well, and then the last time we tested, so if you remove that slow, which you can remove it gives the boss a stack that increases their damage. And for Prot Warrior, that includes using Avatar. So Avatar removes your slow, that gives the boss a stack, and now suddenly the boss does a whole bunch of extra damage in that fight. So it almost becomes a point where you can't use Avatar, which is obviously a huge part of the kit and really obnoxious if that stays in the game that way. So,
like, it's a very cool sort of story dungeon, right? You're breaking into this vault. I don't know exactly what we're going to get, but we got to get down to the bottom of this vault. So you're clearing your way through there, going layer by layer. Going level by level brings us to another downside, though, is that the run back is terrible, too. You can get a portal to the section in which the last boss that you defeated was, but from there, you're still hoofing it and clicking on books, portals that fly you to another section and then fly you down a layer. And cool stuff to look at while you're doing that, but there's a lot of downtime.
All right, so that kind of brings us to the next dungeon we tested, which is Alge'thar Academy, and it's actually the only dungeon that we have that's going to land in S tier for us. And
this is the best reason one.
By far. So this is also the dungeon where you're going to have the highest overall damage numbers. It's a relatively short dungeon. It's 32-minute timer. But none of the trash is like super impactful. So the trash is stuff that you can largely pull together into big groups, doing, 1 or 2 pulls, boss, not one pull, but probably 2-3 pulls, boss, 2-3 pulls, boss, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then the tree boss is also going to pump up everyone's damage numbers quite a bit with, I won't call it fluff because it is important damage, but it's just a lot of fun. The trash is fun. The bosses are designed pretty well, and it's definitely going to be one of those keys that if you get it, you're like, all right, let's roll Academy. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the trash, like we say, it's not impactful stops. There's a couple like on the way to Veximus, which is like this elemental boss that you do need to stun, you do need to interrupt. Otherwise, like if you pull big there, it will wipe your group. So coordinated groups are going to have a little bit easier time with that trash specifically. But like the dragons and the worms that are there, like the big worm, all he does is kind of relocate and then do a frontal. So it's stuff that's easy to dodge. The trash for the tree boss, they put stuff all over the ground like swirlies to dodge, which sure can be annoying, but you can pull that big and it's totally dodgeable, and you're not having to stun. You don't need a bunch of kicks to go in and pull big in there, which is fun. It makes it easier to pug as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as the bosses, or as far as your freedom of movement from boss to boss, this is going to be one of those dungeons where kind of based on lust timers, you're going to be able, you can kind of pull it in how you want. If you want to lust on the tree boss and the bird boss, then maybe you go tree first and then you come back around the other way. You should be able to get 3 lusts, so you have a little bit of freedom to kind of mess around with that. So that is a little bit more enjoyable, kind of gives a little bit of freedom depending on how you think you need to pull the dungeon. Yeah, overall, we think Academy's a lot of fun. It's going to be a really good dungeon overall.
Yeah, people are going to love seeing that key in their bags.
Yep. So the last Dragonflight dungeon that we tested, and it kind of ends up with one in each tier, interestingly. Not good offensive.
Not good.
It's
a B tier. And you know what? I mean, you could maybe say bump it up a little bit because you do get to Dragon Ride in it. And that is definitely the coolest part of this dungeon. The run back isn't a run back, it's a flyback.
It's arguably one of the coolest things about the entire expansion. Those of you who haven't had the chance to play with it and level with it and stuff like that, it really is a much better experience than regular flying, let alone several months of just having a ground mount.
Yes, way better.
So,
as far as the setup of this dungeon, though, you're flying to an area. and there's a boss in this area. So the first one you're going to fly to is going to have these centaurs, and there's some pats that are fairly dangerous, although they did tune those down a little bit. And then you basically have to destroy these or kill these sets of packs, and then the boss spawns. And that's the same way all three of these areas works: is you kill the packs that you need to kill, and then the boss initiates, or then you can initiate the boss or engage the boss. But you can't until the second area has a bunch of totems that you have to destroy before the boss is active. Things like that.
It kind of makes sense though, because if you could just dragonfly from boss to boss, then it would be probably a little bit too much freedom to move through that dungeon, especially on Mythic 0 or Heroic difficulty. You could just go boss to boss. So they want you to have to kill some of the trash, but it does definitely become very formulaic as you go through the route. Like, okay, I've got to fly here, kill these, fly here, kill these.
And maybe Blizzard thinks that, like maybe they have the same thought that you did right there. I actually kind of disagree with that. If you could just fly to boss to boss to boss and do whatever you want with the trash, I would be very happy with that sort of open dungeon design. No one's going to want to pull 3 bosses in a row anyway, because usually you're pulling around, bosses around Lust. But maybe on Fortified Keys you wouldn't, and you'd go boss to, you'd do a big trash pack with Lust, then do a boss, and then do another boss, and maybe even do the next one, and then come back and hit another big lump of trash with Lust or something like that. It kind of opens up the dungeon more for all kinds of interesting routing options.
I'm sure it opens up the dungeon a lot more, but I'm also equally sure that there was some board meeting where some guy was like, I just want you to be able to fly everywhere. And some executive was like, oh, hold on, man. We got to have some kind of structure here.
Yeah, we can't have too much fun.
Yeah, all right. So, but kind of getting back into the dungeon itself, the trash is okay. I don't have a huge problem with the trash. Some of the stuff that they added in before the last boss, there's 2 mini bosses right before the last boss that are very, very obnoxious. So that I just don't like how they're set up. You may be able to skip them, but it's going to cut off a lot of your room, and the last boss already does area denial, so you probably end up killing them. But the bosses themselves are pretty underwhelming. I don't know. None of them are particularly exciting ideas. It feels like what, they already get to Dragon Ride in this dungeon. You want us to put a lot of extra work in too?
Well, the first boss, for instance, we can go through them like we have with the other ones. The first boss is a big dragon, which is cool. And then he summons the centaurs that are going to run towards these catapults or ballistas or whatever you want to call them. And you have to kill the ad before he gets to it, because he's going to destroy it or whatever. And then when the boss does this big AoE cast, and you have to hit the ballista to stop the cast so you don't wipe. And that's basically the whole boss.
Yeah, and it's one that should be very easy. And for any kind of organized group, it's going to be very easy. But then you'll run into that pug where no one knows that you have to kill the ads, and the boss will just cast. Yeah, boss will just cast indefinitely. On the second boss, it's basically the boss era turns into area denial plus collect as many orbs as you can. Collect the orbs, you get bonus damage. And you don't collect the orbs, you just die because they get to the boss.
Yeah.
Third boss is split cleave with a bunch of movement and really feels bad. And then
I'll be honest, 2 centaurs in that one. One of them jumps away from you, so you always kind of have that. That's what that trash that you were talking about that's real annoying before the last boss. They jump away from each other, so you're just in this split 2-target scenario quite a bit. Some classes love that, and tanks don't.
Yeah, Affliction, have fun.
Yeah,
tanks not so much.
Havoc on a Destro lock or something.
Right,
I think Destro's garbage right now.
Not sure. The last, we do tank stuff. We don't do DPS stuff.
I'm not sure.
So then the last boss does a whole bunch of area denial stuff, and then it just stops like halfway through cleaving, and it's like, oh, fight these 4 ads that don't really do anything. Oh, they're dead. Okay, let's fight again, and now I'm stronger. I don't know. Just before, like when it first came out, it wasn't doing anything, and then the last time it was literally bugging out and hitting for like 800k. I don't know. It just wasn't overly impressed with how it worked overall. So,
but Dragon Riding's awesome. So,
so that's why it lands in B.
Yeah,
yeah. All right. So the first Legion dungeon that they gave us to test was Halls of Valor, and for those of you who played in Legion and remember doing Halls of Valor back then, it would probably land just somewhere down in here in C or D. This isn't the same Halls of Valor, though. It's not the 45-minute timer. They've cut some stuff out. They've sped some things up. So it's a little bit better. So it's going to land for us down here kind of in the bottom of B tier.
Yeah, the timer on this one is 38 minutes now, so 7 minutes less than in Legion.
Right, and
one of the things about this dungeon that's a little bit annoying, you can't really pull that big. There's a lot of stops needed. There's a ton of one-shot cast, basically, or close to one-shot cast, where they'll just turn to your DPS, and you need interrupts. There's a lot of mobs, or a couple mobs that heal. They have a couple different heals, a rune that they put on the ground, which you can just move out of, which is easy enough, but they also do an AoE heal. And then the padding sentinels that are there, if you pull those with one of those groups, you no longer can stop, stun and interrupt. They make them immune to that. And so you can get yourself in trouble pretty quick with with people pulling extra on accident and not watching where they're going. Tougher for pubs for sure.
Yeah, and then there's even once you get into the area after the first boss and you get in the hall area, there's just a lot of packs really close to each other, and some of the archers can disengage back into other packs if you're basically unlucky, or it's very easy for people to or to walk away from something and get into the other pack. So it's a dungeon where you're going to have to pull very slow and methodical unless you're really on top of what you're doing, and it's just not incredibly fun trash to deal with for the most part.
It has a handful of one-shot mechanics before the first boss. He does big frontal and just one-shots anyone. Same thing with that first boss, the Sanctify cast. They actually nerfed it, but it'll still just one-shot you. But at least it doesn't one-shot the whole group. It used to, if you got one person got hit by it, it just wiped the group, just straight up. Now it just one-shots the person, which is good and bad because you can still survive technically as a group, but sometimes you'd rather just one shot wipe it and try again as opposed to trying 3-man, 2-man, 3-man a boss the last 50% or something.
Yeah, it's the second boss, Hersha. Yeah, the first boss is the horn guy.
Yep, second boss, sorry.
Nope, all good. And then the third boss, usually for most groups, you go back out to the wolf, and then you have the two bosses. There's still a whole bunch of RP when you get back upstairs to the final boss area. That's counted into the timer, but it just still feels bad to run up there and just sit there and wait while while a bunch of people are talking to start your boss fight, and it's just not super fun. And both of the Legion dungeons have at least a little bit of that downtime from fighting, where you're walking around doing other things.
There's a little bit of pathing choice in here. You can use the ale on the table to skip some of the mobs in the middle section in that banquet area. And then you can choose to... there's also a skip before the second boss. You can skip the 3-pack in front of there that I was talking about earlier that had the one-shots in it. And then choose to pick up some of your trash over in the Fenrir section. Fenrir? The wolf. You can kind of pull some extra bowls and some extra stags and stuff in there to make up the trash. So there's a little bit that you can do with the routing to kind of make it easier on your group. But yeah.
It's not as bad of a dungeon as it was in Legion. It doesn't take as long. It's not if you pull safe and you go carefully, you can still easily time this, but it's still just not it's better than it was, but it's not super fun.
Slow and steady on this one, you'll be all right.
The other Legion dungeon, though, Court of Stars, was back in Legion was a big fan favorite because it was a very quick dungeon. It still is. It's still one of the few 30-minute timers that we have, and we have it landed in A tier, along with the other 30-minute timer, Ruby Life Pools.
Yeah, this is for the most part same old Court of Stars you love. They made a couple of changes to the profession items that are on the ground, like the profession, class, and racial stuff that they had that would, the traps and things like that. They nerfed some of that, so it's not as impactful. You don't have to have a group set up. Make sure you have to have your alchemist, although the first boss still has the vial set up, where if you have an alchemist or a rogue, they can use that. I think those are the only two that can use the vial.
They can, but the alchemist one isn't usually the one you struggle to find people for. It'd be things like,
need a leather worker.
Right. Those buffs, apart from the first boss, all got significantly nerfed. Yeah. So if you don't have one, it's not going to feel nearly as bad. as it did before in Legion. They improved some of the visuals to make it a little bit more clear on some of the things like the mini bosses. They messed around with making the fell detonation on some of the trash interruptible, but I think they ultimately reverted that.
Yeah. It was too easy when it was interruptible.
Right.
Honestly.
My biggest beef with this dungeon is still the last boss. The visuals with the slicing maelstrom and the lines on the ground are just really hard to see sometimes. And that still to me is the boss that annoys me the most in here.
Yeah, another thing in here just that I'm not a big fan of is, the whole party thing, having to find who the infiltrator is. That can be a little bit annoying. Actually not sure if the Demon Hunter site still works. You used to just be able to
it works after you've read all of the
That's
clues.
right. That's
so if
right.
You go read all 5 clues, it works. So
that's right. So yeah, that part's a little bit annoying. Can be time consuming if you're not either quick with that or if you're just kind of guessing. Good luck. They also did a slight change to the mini boss, a little bit of season 4 flavor mixed in. They changed what he does. He does the claw, leeching claw ability, as well as the
summoning a bat.
Yeah, the bat that's going to mind control somebody that if it's not stunned. So exactly, the Zolgamuk's bat is back in Court of Stars. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, he was spawning it a lot. So
yeah, more than Zolgamuk's. It's coming out every 10 or 15 seconds or so. Maybe it was every 30, but it seemed like it was just coming out nonstop. Yeah. So always have something to stun there or kill it. You can kill it, depending on key level, probably.
Yeah, so we came up with a bunch of bad stuff about Court of Stars, but honestly, this dungeon, there isn't a lot of trash. You're not going to pull huge, but it's still going to go quick. And as long as you kill the bosses in one shot, it's not going to be a problem timing it. So you'd be pretty happy to get a Court of Stars.
Yeah, there's a little bit with the route you can choose in the second area after the first boss. There, you have some options for what you want to do with the trash.
Yep,
somewhat.
So as far as talking about options of trash, or in this case, lack thereof, the next dungeon we had was one of our WoD dungeons, and it was Shadowmoon Burial Ground, which is the first time we've seen it on Mythic Plus.
Yeah.
So it's going to land in the middle of our B tier. It's a very, very linear dungeon. Well, even I say linear, but honestly, at this point, you have to backtrack and clear extra trash and go both ways before the first boss just to get enough trash. So there's really not anything that you're going to be able to skip in this dungeon. Very little choice.
We've ended there a few times where you get to the end of the dungeon and you realize, oh, wait, I still need 10% trash. Like that happened last time we ran it. Because we didn't pull the extra trash to one side or the other. Like right there when you first enter, you can go left or right. I think the easiest way is you just need to pull both those groups, not together, but you do one side, then you do the other side, and then you move on linearly straight through the dungeon, pull everything on the way down, all the way to the last boss, and you'll be at 100%.
So is the trash overall, there's a couple of important stops and kicks. But other than that, none of it's particularly impactful besides some of the big elementals. The last pull before the the last pull before the last boss is 2 of the big elemental guys. And unfortunately, with the way that they're tuned, you have to be line of sighting them a bunch.
To me, I mean, this is an oldie, but I think this dungeon looks really cool. It gives me those like Warlock vibes, which I like. And kind of that dark blue and purple coloring. The first boss itself, I think, is actually pretty fun as well. It seems real chaotic, like almost like explosions all over the place. Like the visuals are a little crazy and all over the place, but I don't know. I always have a good time with that one. Having to kill an ad, swap to an ad, swap back to the boss.
That first boss, I think, is going to be significantly easier in a coordinated group than in a pug. In a pug, what's going to happen is the ad's going to come out and every single person's going to throw their CC on it at the same time. You're going to DR it, then the ad's just going to run up to the boss and heal him for 35%. Whereas, if you're like a warrior can just stun on it, and it's not a big deal at all, and you kill it easily. Whereas if it's not organized, it's going to be very quickly get DR'd, and then it could easily make it to the boss. So.
Yeah, I think this dungeon modernizes pretty well. Also, there's not we talked about Halls of Valor, a lot of casts that are like one-shotty that target random members in your party. There's not a lot of that. The trash between the first and second boss is fairly deadly with some AoE pulsing damage. But there's not a lot of like, hey, you need a bunch of kicks for this dungeon, which is nice. Yeah. You can kind of pull bigger around like the spider and bat area before the third boss as well. I am not a big fan of the third boss though.
Start playing Death Knight, you won't care quite as much.
Yeah, I'm sure Death's Advance is great for that, but I don't like the boss where he's just going to try and inhale you and you got to run away for 10 seconds and just kind of stand there. I mean, I literally just jumped away on a demon hunter and just stand in a little pile of bones, a little circle for 10 seconds and do nothing. Throw a glaive.
Not uninteractive gameplay. It's just not particularly.
No.
Yeah. So the last boss, you have kind of that Painsmith wall or the Aranog wall where you got to kill a unit to get through it. There is one of the things that I kind of dislike about the dungeons. There's a few different classes that have some pretty strong tech in here if you're going to use it correctly. So there's some mind control where you can basically like reduce boss health by 50%. There's there's spell reflect that hits for over 1 million on the second boss, and then on the last boss you can just warlock gateway and skip this wall and not even care about it every other time. So like there are some classes that if it makes it through to live like this, for pushing those hierarchies, you're almost going to 100% bring those classes, and it could really kind of pinch what you're looking for in that key.
Yeah, the priest dominate and mind thing specifically is extremely OP. It's like the first caster group. I don't remember the name of the mob, but we had a priest dominate mind. It reduces the health of enemy mobs by 50%,
including
works on bosses, and you just melt the dungeon. Everything has half health. So I have a feeling that might get removed, but priest and warlock might be like the meta in that one, depending on if they do any damage. But yeah.
And Fury Warrior taunt the second boss for that 1 million spell reflect.
Yeah.
All right. So overall, it's a short dungeon. It's pretty straightforward. If you run it well, it should be pretty easy for most groups. So I don't think you'll be too upset to see it. So it lands in B, along honestly with the other WoW dungeon. So Temple of the Jade Serpent also is going to land up here in our B. Probably right after Shadow Moon, but
that one's from Mist, not WAD.
Oh,
but yes.
Yeah, Mist.
Mist of Pandaria.
I'm not very good at math.
Panda Land.
Yeah. So another fairly short dungeon. A lot of the dungeons in this one are pretty short. Halls and Azure Vaults are the two that can't necessarily boast that, but this is another one. You have a little bit of a choice at the start. You can go left, you can go right, depending on where you want to use your lust. You're probably just going to go to the left because that seems to be the at least slightly harder boss. The bosses to me are pretty underwhelming in this place. So they did do a full rework. I don't remember the boss's name. I'm not a name guy. But the first
boss with all the water. You do not have to kill wave after wave of single elementals with the little droplets that form before he activates. He activates right away now. He still does that Hydra blast where he spins around in a circle with a bunch of water that you have to dodge. That absolutely one-shots anybody. Like on any key level, it seemed like. I mean, on a 10, it would one-shot you.
And with that, you're now dropping debuffs on the ground that knock you up. So if you set those in a bad place, you'll get, when you try to run over them, you get knocked up. And also the water in between the platforms knocks up. So it's a pretty unforgiving key if you mess it up. Not key, but an unforgiving boss. It's not overly difficult, but if you have 5 people in there and each time the boss spins around you lose one, then that boss all of a sudden takes 10 minutes.
And you want to drop the debuffs towards the outside of the platform, really, so that you can run on the inside.
Right, not super pug friendly on that one. If you get in there with someone who doesn't know what they're doing.
Also, they added a trash pack before that boss as well that has 2 casters in it, and that first set of trash is extremely dangerous in there.
Slaps pretty hard.
Yeah, it's got AoE burst damage as well as a single target. So it's the elementals slap, the new casters that they added in there slap as well right before the boss.
Yeah, and that's kind of a theme with the trash throughout this dungeon. The trash hits hard. It doesn't do anything that's super complex, but if you get in there and the Shah fears, cast an AoE fear, if you miss it, then you're just going to probably wipe on a high key because it's like a 4-second fear.
That is the most probably punishing thing in there is those little Shahs that fear you. And it fears everyone, just an AoE fear.
Right. So because of that, and it needs 2 people to interrupt, first and a second interrupt. So having you can't really pull two of those together unless you're really on it, really organized. There's a lot of stuff like that where in a pug you're going to go slow and methodical again, and the timer is pretty lenient, but it's not going to be something that's like Alge'thar Academy where you're just like, pull it all, have fun, let's go. It's going to be much more paced. And
yeah, this one's got a 35-minute timer.
So
not the shortest, yeah, but it probably doesn't need it. As long as you're not wiping, you take it slow and steady, you'll be fine. They did add also another trash/mini boss before the third boss. So they're doing some things to kind of make it add a little flavor to it, because it is a pretty bland dungeon if you think about it. It's a pretty short dungeon. It has some weird trash with like a fish in a bubble and kind of stuff, but then that Shaw area before the third boss, even that, you want to do big pulls, but it can be pretty dangerous as well. You really need AoE stops if you're going to do big pulls for that third boss.
Judd's going into a lot of detail on this because he spent a lot of time angry at this dungeon before we figured out kind of the key to that one. So
mainly on nerfed ass prot paladin, by the way. Nerfed ass prot paladin. That boss just one-shot me, and it wasn't fun. So
I enjoyed it on Fury Warrior. I was fine. But
yeah.
All right. Well, everyone, that's kind of our thoughts on the different dungeons. Obviously, it's subjective, but it kind of gave us a format to talk about it and kind of give our thoughts.
Our opinions are our own. So
let us know down in the comments if you guys have had the chance to play these, what you think about them. If you haven't had the chance to play them, which ones are you excited about? And we'll see you guys in the next one.